Israel approves a major expansion of its settlements in the West Bank. What could it mean for the future of the Palestinian territory? Hello, I'm Arnold Naidu, and this is The Heat. At a time when international media attention has focused on Israel's military assault on Gaza and the humanitarian crisis unfolding there, a major new development that will impact millions of Palestinians has been announced for the West Bank. The Israeli government has approved 22 new Jewish settlements for the occupied territory in what will be the biggest expansion there for decades. More than 700,000 Jews already live in settlements spread across the West Bank and East Jerusalem. The West Bank is also home to more than 3 million Palestinians who reside under Israeli military rule, while the Palestinian Authority governs limited areas. These settlements are widely regarded as illegal under international law, although Israel disputes this. The Israeli Defense Ministry said in a statement, "The new settlements are all placed within a long-term strategic vision whose goal is to strengthen the Israeli hold on the territory to avoid the establishment of a Palestinian state and to create the basis for future development of settlements in the coming decades." But Palestinian officials and human rights groups are highly critical of the move.
According to the map provided by the Israeli authorities, the new settlements approved are spread throughout the West Bank. The idea is to completely deny any sort of a possibility of Palestinian territorial contiguity, to remove Palestinian communities from their homes in the open spaces in the West Bank in what amounts to ethnic cleansing. And this is done through the use of extreme violence. It's happening on the ground already, and if these settlements go ahead, certainly this will lead to far more violence and to a much larger area of the West Bank emptied of its Palestinian inhabitants.
To discuss the major implications of all of this, I'm joined now from Ramallah by Mustafa Barghouti. He is a medical doctor and president of the Palestinian Medical Relief Society. He also is founder and leader of the Palestinian National Initiative. Dr. Barghouti, great to have you with us. Firstly, let me ask you, what is your reaction to this plan recently announced by Israel that it will establish these 22 new settlements in the occupied West Bank? This is the biggest escalation, as I said, in decades. How will this impact Palestinians in that territory?
Well, it's not just part of a plan. It's a whole strategy that Israel is following. And the matter is not only restricted by the issue of 22 new settlements, illegal settlements. This is Israel's strategy to eliminate any possibility of the creation of a Palestinian state or the so-called two-state solution. But it's more than that. It's about the fact that there are 7.3 million Palestinians now on the land of historic Palestine versus 7.1 million Jewish people. And the Israeli solution to that is not two states or one democratic state with equal rights for everybody, but their plan is ethnic cleansing of the 7.3 million Palestinians, whether in Gaza or the West Bank. To name things as they should be named, what we face here is a fascist government who are running the show and who have two of them, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, have just been subjected to sanctions by Western countries who never did that before to any Israeli, including Canada, including Britain, including Australia, including New Zealand. This is all happening because nobody can tolerate anymore these fascist tendencies in Israel, which are conducting 3 war crimes in parallel against the Palestinian people: the war crime of genocide in Gaza, the war crime of collective punishment of Palestinians everywhere, including starving people in Gaza, and the war crime of ethnic cleansing, both in Gaza and the West Bank.
Can you give us a sense of how these numbers of Jewish settlers have grown over the years, and how these settlements, which are illegal and built on stolen land, have spread out across the occupied territory?
Since the very beginning of the Israeli military occupation of the West Bank in 1967, Israeli different parties, whether on the left or on the right, started building illegal settlements in the occupied territories. Because no serious party in Israel could have agreed on a solution that would lead to the creation of a Palestinian state. And in the beginning, the settlers or the settlements were created illegally around East Jerusalem, which is occupied territory, and in the Jordan Valley, and on the borders with Israel. But when Likud came to power, it made sure to spread the settlements everywhere in the West Bank. And Oslo Agreement had a major flaw. One of the biggest mistakes of Oslo Agreement that it was signed without conditioning the agreement with total and complete freeze of settlement activities as we demanded at the time. And the result of that is that while in 1993 we had 122,000 illegal settlers, today we have more than 800,000. And these settlers have become a major political base for the fascist, Zionist, ultra-religious tendencies in the Israeli political system. They are the base of the growth of fascism now in Israel, and they are now controlling the show because the finance minister is a settler by the name of Smotrich himself in a settlement called Kadumim. And the person in charge of the internal security is Ben Gvir, who's another settler living in Kiryat Arba near Hebron. And Smotrich himself was appointed practically as the civil administrator of the West Bank, the occupied West Bank. In reality, Netanyahu and his government put in the hands of these illegal settlers all the power, all the money, and all the decisions about distributing and spreading illegal settlements everywhere in the West Bank, trying to repeat the same process of ethnic cleansing that took place in 1948 when 70% were kicked out of their homes and became refugees, and when 523 Palestinian communities were erased to the ground to create the State of Israel.
Now, over the past few months, we've seen the further displacement of Palestinians in the occupied West Bank by the Israeli military. Israel claims that this is about security, and what they're doing is going after militants in the territory. How do you see that?
That's an absolute lie. I mean, everything that Israeli government is doing here goes in two directions. First of all, allowing illegal settlers who are terrorists to conduct terrorism against the civilian population of the West Bank, especially in villages and communities that are close to the settlements. And these illegal settlers are behaving in the same manner like terrorist gangs in 1948 who forced Palestinians out of their land. Already more than 30 communities have been evicted because of the behavior of these illegal settlers, but with the support of the Israeli army. The second thing they are doing, the army itself is coming in and pushing Palestinians out of their land and giving the land to the illegal settlers to build on them. So what we face here is nothing but the same settler colonial project. At one point, it was called only occupation. At one point, we said that this occupation has transformed into a system of apartheid. Today, the reality is that it is a settler colonial project with all the other characteristics, including occupation and apartheid and other things. But their main goal is really the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians in violation of every international law. And this process will not stop unless the world community, including all major powers, including all the countries, especially those who have permanent seats in the Security Council, would initiate sanctions on Israel. Without sanctions on Israel, this process of ethnic cleansing will not stop.
Right, this pressure that you talk about from Israel's Western allies, I mean, this latest declaration comes as Israel is coming under some pressure from its allies in the West, and that is because of its onslaught that's taking place in Gaza right now. Even Israel's longtime ally, France, is now considering recognizing a Palestinian state. But this is how the Israeli Defense Minister, Israel Katz, justifies these illegal settlements. Let's listen to him.
This is a decisive response to the terrorist organizations that are trying to harm and weaken our hold on this land. And it is also a clear message to Macron and his associates. They will recognize a Palestinian state on paper, but we will build the Jewish-Israeli state here on the ground.
So, tough statement there from Israel Katz. There's also, you referred to the extreme right-wing minister, Bezalel Smotrich. Now, he has said that he wants to annex the West Bank. What do you believe is the ultimate goal?
Well, he's telling exactly what they think about. And this is the true line of Netanyahu's government: the annexation of the West Bank, the prevention of any establishment of a Palestinian state. And of course, they are encouraged by the United States government. The American ambassador to Israel has just declared that creating a Palestinian state is no longer a goal for the United States. And practically, he's encouraging these illegal settlers by saying that they are not settlers, they're building in Jewish land. He also declared that there is nothing that the Palestinian people don't exist. There is nothing like the Palestinian people. That's the American ambassador to Israel. So, of course, when they receive such encouragement from a country like the United States of America, they go very far. But on the other hand, they are creating a very strong opposition at the world level by the peoples of the world. And I believe some of the European reactions are welcomed, are important, like imposing sanctions on Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, but they are not enough. What we need is true sanctions on Israel, on the Israeli government. Israel must feel that there is a price for the policy that it is conducting. And what we need from the French president when he declares that his intention is to recognize the Palestinian state is to accompany that, to combine that with declaring that occupation must end completely, and that Israeli occupation of the West Bank is illegal and it has to end, as well as the occupation of Gaza. And he also should say, if he really is sincere about building a Palestinian state, that all illegal Israeli settlements, and all settlements are illegal, must be removed from the West Bank. Otherwise, there will be no place for a Palestinian state. And we will have to continue to struggle, in this case, for one democratic state that should treat everybody equally, whether they are Palestinians or Jewish.
Right, and there are many settlers, and indeed the Israeli government itself, who believe something that's very different. I mean, we have Jewish settlers who claim that they have a historical and biblical right to live in what they call Judea and Samaria. Let's listen to one of them.
And it's our land. Other peoples came here, they conquered, they left. We went to exile, and now we came back home. And there are the other people who are here in the neighborhood, but they're here, they're visitors. This is our land.
So that's the view of one of those settlers, that Palestinians who live there are visitors, as he puts it. I mean, how do Palestinians with families that go back generations feel when they hear comments like that?
They feel that we are dealing with fascist racists, and they will not succeed. They will not force us out of our country. We will do everything we can to stay in our land. And in response to his arguments, there are 3 points here. One point is, if they claim they've been here 3,000 years ago, well, our ancestors have been here 4,500 years ago. So we go further deep in history. Second, if he follows this kind of logic, then I guess most of the people who live in the United States now have to leave.
Yeah.
And leave the country for the indigenous population.
Right.
Third, by which law a person who never lived in Palestine, who lives in New York or Siberia or anywhere else, has the right to come here and take our land,
Right.
while we who have lived here for thousands of years are not allowed to stay in our land?
Okay, Dr. Barghouti, we have to leave it there. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And for more perspective, I'm joined now from Jerusalem by Sarah Yael Hershon. She is a historian at the University of Haifa and a fellow of the Jewish People Policy Institute. Also joining us from Ontario, Canada, is Michael Link. He is Professor Emeritus of Law at Western University, and he's a former special rapporteur for the human rights situation in the Palestinian territories. Welcome to both of you. Sarah, let me start with you. We just heard some very harsh, very fierce criticism from the Palestinian leader Mustafa Barghouti over this Israeli plan to expand settlements in the West Bank. Dr. Barghouti said that Israel was being run by a group of fascists and that there was a pattern here of ethnic cleansing, which goes back a long way, and that all of this amounts to war crimes. What is your response to that?
I have to say I reject the language that Dr. Barghouti used. I don't believe that this is ethnic cleansing or is tantamount to war crimes, but it's a possible serious violation of international law. My question is whether this is actually rhetorical or is going to lead to real changes on the ground. Obviously, currently, Israel doesn't see a horizon in the near future for the two-state solution. And they are looking to secure the West Bank so that it doesn't become another Gaza for the Israeli people. But I often feel that right now, Israel, as much as Palestinians in the West Bank, are kind of in a bit of a holding pattern, waiting to see how the Israel-Hamas war will turn out, and whether these are actual tangible steps on the ground or harsh rhetoric on the part of an ultranationalist government who's, by the way, we should mention, whose coalition is teetering on the brink of collapse this week, I think remains to be seen.
Right, Sarah, you say there's a bit of a holding pattern right now, but the UN's highest court, the International Court of Justice, issued an advisory opinion last year that said, quote, Israel's continued presence in the occupied Palestinian territory is unlawful.
Well, I mean, clearly, international law does not allow a military to transfer civilians into an occupied zone. But we also are at a stalemate in the two-state solution. And the October 7th massacre, I think, has justifiably provided many doubts in Israeli minds that Palestinians, or at least Palestinians in Gaza, though polling data is not necessarily very promising about prospects for the two-state solution amongst West Bank Palestinians or their support for Hamas as well. I think that we're currently at a stalemate of a diplomatic process, and Israel's moves are reflective of that because there's really an uncertain future here. If it's not diplomacy and it's not war, how do we get to peace between Israelis and Palestinians that will allow for an equitable division of the land and both a state of the Jews and a Palestinian state living side by side in peace and security? It's not clear to me how that's going to happen right now, but clearly there's pressure from the international community to make it so, and we'll have to see what steps the UN and other Western governments in particular will take in response to this news.
Michael, what is your view on that? Is there any relationship to what happened on October 7th when Hamas militants attacked Israelis in Israel and what the Israeli government has now announced, an expansion of settlements in the West Bank?
Look, the overall direction of the Israeli government for decades now, but particularly in the hands of an ultra-nationalist government, has been to try to create as wide a space for Jews as possible with a minimal number of Palestinians, whether that's in the West Bank or in East Jerusalem or in Gaza. Of course, there's relationships between what is going on in Gaza and what is now going on in the West Bank. In fact, we have Israeli ministers talking about the Gazification of the West Bank in terms of their operations, particularly at the most militant of camps in Jenin and Tulkarem. We've had those camps largely cleared out by the Israeli military. 40,000 Palestinian refugees living in those refugee camps have been scattered, I don't know where, throughout the rest of the West Bank. And it looks like this is all a prelude to the formal annexation of parts of the West Bank. The Israeli military has taken pride, if you like, in the destruction of these camps, in the assurance that they are now being able to have full military control and presence in Tulkarem and Jenin.
Right.
And this is leading probably to the fall of the Palestinian Authority in the near future, and then probably conditions are going to make it unlivable for Palestinians in the West Bank to continue to be there.
Right. Michael, the at least the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he says, and I'm quoting him here, he says, the Jewish people are not occupiers in their own land, unquote. How are the settlements a violation of international law?
Well, first of all, Israel is recognized by almost the entire world as the occupying power in East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and Gaza. That's been reaffirmed by hundreds of General Assembly and Security Council resolutions. Israel and some Republican administrations, including the present one, are virtually the only countries in the world that do not recognize that occupier status with regards to this. What that means if you're an occupying power is that your rule is going to be temporary, that you have to govern in the best interest of the local population, that you can do nothing to assert sovereignty over even a square inch of the occupied territory, and you have to leave the occupation as soon as reasonably possible. All four of those principles with respect to the governance of the laws of war and occupation, which have been around for 75 years, Israel is in serious breach of. And that's what's generated these recent resolutions at the Security Council and the General Assembly condemning Israel's ongoing rule, as well as the decision by the International Court of Justice in its advisory opinion last July that Israel's occupation has now become unlawful because it's overstayed its welcome and because it's asserting sovereignty over territory that doesn't belong to it.
Sarah, Palestinians in the occupied territory and the occupied West Bank are reacting very strongly to this latest Israeli expansion plans. Let's listen to what they had to say.
Regardless of any decisions, we will remain on our land. Their decisions will not impact us. It's just the same old stance. It's obvious. They want to seize the lands and displace people. We are steadfast on this land. We have no solution other than to remain on this land.
So as we can hear, Sarah, the views are very entrenched. Palestinians view what is happening as a land grab, as displacement. I mean, how can Israel justify settlers, many of whom are from the United States, I should say, kicking Palestinians off their land that they've lived on for generations?
Yeah, about 15% of the settler movement today is from our American Israelis who immigrated to Israel and later moved beyond the Green Line. That was the results of research in my book, City on a Hilltop, American Jews and the Israeli Settler Movement, that was published by Harvard University Press in 2017. And it is an interesting demographic characteristic of the settler movement today. I think the question we have at hand is really, are we looking at a two-state solution of some kind of drawing a line in the sand between a state of Israel and a state of Palestine in the future? Will that be along the lines of what the Oslo Accord had laid out, which would be, three major settlement blocks, perhaps a fourth settlement block that would be absorbed into territorial Israel alongside land swaps that would become part of the future state of Palestine? Or are we moving towards a different reality? Because the issue of the land grab matters, but it has to also be seen within the context of what we're talking about as an overall solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. What land are we talking about? Where? What was the ultimate proposals for the fact that some of the land, frankly, would be grabbed by Israel, even under the Oslo Accords, that this was going to be sanctioned, that these settlements would be absorbed into territorial Israel as part of a final status agreement, and what are we thinking about today as being the resolution of this conflict, and how does land play into that? Or are we looking at a very different model, which is one state for all of its citizens, the so-called one-state solution, where the issue of the where and how of land management is less relevant than the allocation of power?
Michael Link, what do you make of what Sarah just told us there, that the demarcation of the two countries is still very fluid? It hasn't been finalized yet.
Well, of course, we've had the ongoing and failed Oslo process since 1993. 32 years into what was supposed to be a 5-year plan, we have more settlers than ever. We have more land confiscation by Israel in the occupied territories than ever, and we have the vision of a two-state solution further away than ever as well. Frankly speaking, and we have to pay attention to the fact that there is a UN conference being organized next week by France and by Saudi Arabia in New York at the UN headquarters on the prospects for a two-state solution. In my mind, anybody who speaks about a two-state solution, the onus is on them to show how that is ever going to be achievable with 360 Israeli settlements in East Jerusalem and the West Bank, and over 740,000 Israeli settlers in East Jerusalem and the West Bank, with that population growing by 20 to 25,000 settlers a year. We're now passing the 750,000 mark with respect to this. And frankly, I've never known of any global North country that repeats the mantra of a two-state solution that's ever shown that it's got any strategy, any persuasive strategy on how to get there. Sarah has talked about land swaps. Let's keep in mind that the decision from the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice last July, which said that the Israeli occupation and presence in the occupied territory is unlawful, said that that the solution by law is a complete retreat of Israel back to the 1967 borders, the complete evacuation of its 360 settlements and 740,000 Israeli settlers. I don't think there's going to be an appetite in the aftermath of this decision for Palestinians to want to say, you can have your settlement block here and divide us up here. That's not a Palestinian state in any modern definition of what a political scientist would recognize.
Well, that was the definition that the Oslo Accords was willing to accept and, got quite far along. It's very true that we're 32 years into a process where no final status solution was agreed upon. But what the UN has proposed is very different from what the blueprint of the Oslo Accords actually laid out. And we can argue about whether we are really beyond the point of retreat to basically the blueprint of Oslo, but that's where we were when we started a diplomatic process towards a two-state solution. So I feel obligated to point out that was the rubric. I also feel obligated to say that I think that the onus is also on people who are activists on behalf of the one-state solution to also show how we are going to get there without massive intercommunal violence between Israelis and Palestinians, because there's no clear way to get to point A to point B of power sharing in the current configuration of both Israeli and Palestinian society without absolutely tremendous bloodshed. So I don't think it's a very simple solution either, as much as the two-state solution looks very much in the rearview mirror, that it looks very distant from being implemented anytime soon. And as you say, that there is going to be this conversation happening next week. And I think part of it is also a discussion about will there be further Western states that may unilaterally recognize Palestine in some shape or form, which ultimately will lead to more unilateral steps, both unilateral recognition of Palestine, but also possibly unilateral annexation of parts of the West Bank by Israel in reaction to that. So we're getting into a pattern that is quite dangerous. We don't see any movement forward on the two-state solution, but I don't think we're moving towards a one-state solution, in a peaceful way either.
Okay, and that is where we have to leave it. Michael Link, Sarah Yael Hirshon, thanks to both of you for being with us. That is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington.